We are now joined via Zoom by Advocate Bronwyn Pithey. She is lawyer at Women's Legal Centre and the head of the Right to be Free from Violence programme. Advocate, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks very much for joining us here on SABC News.
Thank you very much for having us.
You're most welcome. Let's talk about, this issue of withdrawal of cases. I don't know if you got a chance to listen to that clip we just played there, but listening to that insert, can you talk to us about how common really there are cases of women who do decide to withdraw their cases against their perpetrators? I mean, the lady who was speaking in that particular clip said, if we were to go to the graveyards of women who have died at the hands of their perpetrators, they would say the exact same thing, that they thought that these men would change. I mean, is this really that common?
Yes, I think the bottom line is yes, unfortunately so, for very good reasons. I think that it happens obviously very much in domestic violence situations where people know each other. And the dynamics that were explained very well by the woman that was interviewed now explain a lot of the reasons behind why women withdraw cases. And then it extends right into all forms of violence against women or gender-based violence, right into sexual offences as well, not only when the victim or the complainant knows the perpetrator. Because there are so many factors that influence the process of seeking justice for women, that very often women, either because of personal circumstances, so what we heard in terms of, apologies that are made, very often women are very financially dependent on their partners if it's a domestic situation. And then, of course, we have the very unfortunate situation where the system is not really geared to assisting and protecting women who do come forward, either in domestic violence situations or sexual offences matters. And we see a very high withdrawal rate from people who simply don't feel like they're getting that protection and become exhausted through the process because it is just re-traumatizing constantly.
Yeah, and I would imagine that, the perpetrators take advantage of this position that they have of superiority, particularly, when you made the example now of financial dependence, financial reliance, that perhaps these perpetrators have the sense that, well, you have nowhere to go, so I can do as I please. And I'm sure that's quite a big situation, quite a big story when it comes to the victims actually staying, because a lot of people question, why did you stay? Why did you not leave this person?
Well, I think, you've hit the nail on the head, because too often we victim blame. We kind of think, well, if I were in that position, I would have left. But that's really not understanding the position from which so many women find themselves. Very often they are financially dependent. And even if they're not financially dependent, the power differential very often between the two people is quite marked. Very often there are children involved. A lot of women believe that staying would be better for children. Men threaten with violence, even if they don't necessarily perpetrate it, and they threaten to escalate the violence if women leave. So very often, threats of suicide or murder-suicide, which tragically we see far too often, in this country. So really what we're looking for is a system which is more holistically geared towards making it easier, in inverted commas, for women to leave if they are in danger. We need a social security system that really does make it easier. So in other words, women become more financially dependent, and then that there are services available, such as shelters, that are longer term and not just short term, but also provide for development of skills, so women can actually go ahead and equip themselves to be independent. And I think it really does bear worth saying that there are an incredible amount of phenomenal civil society organizations that are doing this work and really should be far better funded by government to run shelters, to run skills development for women who are in these positions where they need to get out of relationships where they are financially dependent.
Yeah, I've sometimes heard, victims of GBV, talking about their experiences at the point of actually reporting the case. You would sometimes hear something scary, like, if they arrive at the police station, the police officers would say, bizarre things like, well, just go home and work this thing out. I mean, this is also quite an issue where the treatment of victims when it comes to the police stations. How should this be dealt with? Because, that is where they should be. It's the first place they go, if they do go. How should policemen perhaps be trained better or taught to deal with GBV situations? Because it seems that's also the biggest problem is the start of dealing with the cases is where they have the biggest problem.
Very much so. The police are known as the gateway into the criminal justice system. And if a woman's experience, or anyone's experience for that matter, is negative at that first interface, they're not very encouraged to stay in the system. And just to link back to your previous issue around withdrawals, that very often influences the very high withdrawal rate because they don't feel heard. And, we've referred to the term secondary victimization, where someone has already been victimized through the violence perpetrated against them and then have this second guessing or this questioning or not being believed by the very people who should be protecting them. So, we have so many things in place for the police involved directly in domestic violence and sexual offences. We have specialised FCS units within the police. We have domestic violence desks at many, many police stations. We have victims' rooms. But at the end of the day, it really is about attitudes and the very strong attitudes that exist, unfortunately, in our society broadly in relation to women, extend into and to the people that are making up the services of police, prosecutors, etc. And very often those very limited beliefs and those very myths that people hold on to, that women lie, that domestic issues should be sorted out between the two people, it's a private matter, that tends to be perpetuated by the very people that should be offering help. So absolutely, we have to have so-called hard skills where people are trained to be good investigators, to collect evidence, to take statements properly, to be able to, really have a complete docket to hand over to the prosecution. But, the so-called, and I don't like calling them soft skills because they tend to be undermined then, but around attitude, because I think that informs how you perform the tasks that you are meant to be performing, like statement taking. You've got to be empathetic. You've got to understand. You've got to be free of those myths that believe that women are raped because they deserve it, of the way they dress, that domestic violence happens because women are not performing their wifely duties. All of those kind of myths really add to those attitudes, which unfortunately are still very prevalent in personnel in the criminal justice system. So training, absolutely, as you mentioned. But I also think something that's very, very important is complaints mechanisms that have serious consequences, that they have sanctions, that there are consequences for those members of the police and the prosecution when they don't adhere to the guidelines that they are meant to be following, and our policies are very clear, then there must be serious sanction and consequences to that behavior of theirs.
All right, Advocate, I wish we had more time. Thank you very much for speaking to us here on SABC News. Much appreciated. That is Advocate Bronwyn Pithey. She is a lawyer at Women's Legal Centre and the head of the Right to Be Free from Violence program.